The blood-soaked letter trembled in Faith Parker's hands as she stood on the porch of her small homestead. The Montana sunset, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The year was 1876, and the words on the paper confirmed what she had feared for months. Her husband was dead, killed in a mining accident hundreds of miles away in Colorado. Behind her, the sound of her children's laughter drifted through the open door. 5-year-old Abigail and 3-year-old Thomas were blissfully unaware that their father would never return. Faith pressed the letter to her chest and took a deep breath, willing herself not to break down. They had a farm to run, crops in the ground, and winter approaching. She was now alone with 2 small children in the unforgiving wilderness of the American frontier. A movement caught her attention. Across the field, a lone rider approached. Even from a distance, she recognized the broad shoulders and steady seat of Xavier, their neighbor from the adjacent ranch. He'd been a friend to her husband and had always been kind to her family, often stopping by to lend a hand with the heavier work. As he drew closer, Faith quickly wiped her tears. She didn't want anyone's pity, especially not Ethan's. At 30, he was only a few years older than she was, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of deeper experiences, hardships that had tempered him like steel. "Evening, Mrs. Parker," he called, tipping his hat as he dismounted. Then he saw her face, the letter clutched in her hand. "Faith, what's happened?" She couldn't speak, just handed him the letter. As he read, his expression darkened, and when he looked up, his eyes held a mix of sorrow and concern. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. "Is there anything I can do?" Faith shook her head. "No, thank you, we'll manage." Ethan glanced toward the house where the children's voices could still be heard. "Have you told them yet? How do you tell a child their father is never coming home?" Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I can do this alone." Ethan hesitated, then said firmly, "You're not alone, Faith. You have friends here, I promise you that." Little did Faith know how much weight that promise would carry in the years to come. The following morning, Faith awoke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Ethan on her roof, replacing shingles that had come loose during the last storm. "Mr. Xavier," she called up. "What are you doing?" He looked down, squinting against the morning sun. "Your roof won't make it through winter. Thought I'd fix it before the snow comes." "I can't pay you," she said, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Not asking to be paid," he replied simply, returning to his work. Throughout that first difficult day, Ethan repaired the roof, chopped a cord of firewood, and fixed the broken hinge on the barn door. When evening came, he tipped his hat and rode away, only to return the next day with tools to mend the fence around her vegetable garden. This pattern continued through the changing seasons. Ethan never stayed for meals, never lingered too long, but he was always there when something needed fixing. He was careful to maintain a respectful distance, never presuming, never pushing boundaries. He was just a neighbor helping a neighbor, he'd say whenever Faith tried to thank him. When autumn came and harvest time approached, Ethan brought 2 ranch hands with him. Together, they gathered Faith's modest corn crop and made sure her root cellar was stocked for the coming winter. The men worked quietly and efficiently, treating her property with care. "Mrs. Parker," Ethan said as they prepared to leave that evening, "I was thinking your boy Thomas might like to learn to ride. He's getting to that age. I've got a gentle pony that's not doing much but eating hay these days." Faith hesitated. Her husband had always planned to teach Thomas to ride, but that would never happen now. "That's very kind, but, Mama, please." Thomas had appeared beside her, his eyes wide with excitement. "Can I learn to ride like Papa?" Faith looked at her son's hopeful face, then at Ethan's steady gaze. "Perhaps on Sundays after church," she conceded, and so began another ritual. Each Sunday, Ethan would arrive with the small, dappled pony. Thomas took to riding naturally, his small face alight with joy as Ethan patiently taught him how to sit properly, how to guide the animal with gentle pressure from his legs, how to speak soothingly when the pony grew skittish. Abigail would watch from the fence, clearly longing to join in but too shy to ask. One Sunday, Ethan approached her with a small leather-bound book. "My mother taught me to read with this," he said, offering it to her. "Thought you might like to try." Abigail took the book reverently. "Will you teach me the hard words, Mr. Xavier?" "I reckon I could," he replied, his weathered face softening. Winter came harsh that year. Snow piled high around the small homestead, and the wind howled through the night. But Faith's roof didn't leak. Her woodpile remained substantial, and every few days, Ethan would appear through the blowing snow to check on them, often bringing fresh meat or supplies from town. One particularly bitter evening, a blizzard swept across the valley. Faith had just put the children to bed when she heard pounding at the door. She opened it to find Ethan, snow crusted on his coat and hat, leading a horse laden with supplies. "Storm's worse than expected," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "Thought you might need some extra provisions." Faith invited him in, insisting he warm himself by the fire before heading back to his own ranch. As they sat in the flickering light, she studied his profile, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the small scar above his right eyebrow. "Why are you doing all this, Ethan?" she asked suddenly. He turned to look at her, surprised by the direct question. "Doing what? Helping us. You've been here almost every day since." She couldn't finish the sentence. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Your husband was a good man. He'd have done the same for my family if situations were reversed." "Is that the only reason?" His eyes met hers briefly before returning to the fire. "It's reason enough, isn't it?" Before she could respond, a loud crash from outside interrupted them. Ethan was on his feet immediately, grabbing his coat. "Stay here," he instructed, heading out into the storm. He returned minutes later, face grim. "A tree branch came down on your chicken coop. We need to move the birds into the barn for the night, or they won't survive the cold." Together, they battled the elements, securing the chickens in a corner of the barn. The work was hard, the wind cutting through their clothing, but they managed. When they finally returned to the house, they were both soaked and shivering. Faith insisted Ethan stay the night rather than risk the journey back to his ranch in such conditions. She made a pallet for him near the fire, keeping a respectful distance between his sleeping area and the small room she shared with her children. As she prepared to retire, Ethan spoke from his place by the fire. "I don't want you to think I expect anything from you, Faith. That's not why I help." Faith paused at the door to her room. "I know that, Ethan. You're a good man." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving a pristine white landscape in its wake. Ethan repaired the chicken coop before heading back to his own ranch, leaving behind a strange emptiness in the small cabin. Spring arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the valley. Faith's second year as a widow began with planting season. To her surprise, Ethan arrived with seeds and tools, ready to help prepare the fields. "I can manage," Faith insisted, pride making her voice sharper than intended. "I know you can," Ethan replied evenly, "but 4 hands work faster than 2. As they worked side by side in the fresh soil, Faith found herself watching Ethan with the children. Thomas followed him everywhere, peppering him with questions that Ethan answered with infinite patience. Abigail, now 6, would bring him the book he'd given her, proudly reading aloud the passages she'd mastered. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Faith found Ethan sitting on her porch steps, whittling a small wooden horse while Thomas watched in fascination. "Is that for me, Mr. Xavier?" the boy asked. Might be, Ethan replied, his knife moving skillfully over the wood. If you promise to take good care of it. I will, I promise. I'll name him Thunder like your big horse. Ethan laughed, a rare sound that made Faith pause in the doorway. That's a fine name for a wooden horse. Later, after the children were asleep, Faith joined Ethan on the porch. The night was mild, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. You're good with them, she said softly. Ethan shrugged. They're good kids. They adore you. He looked uncomfortable with the praise. Children need someone to look up to, a man in their life. Are you volunteering? The words slipped out before Faith could stop them. Ethan's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, something flickered in their depths, something that made Faith's heart skip a beat. Then he stood, placing his hat on his head. It's getting late. I should head back. Faith watched him ride away, confused by her own feelings and by his reaction. She had been a wife, had known the comfort of marriage, but her husband had been gone for less than a year. It was too soon to think of another man, especially one as reserved as Xavier. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and small pleasures. Ethan remained a constant presence, teaching Thomas to fish in the creek that ran through Faith's property, helping Abigail build a small garden of her own where she proudly grew radishes and carrots. One hot afternoon, Faith watched from the window as Ethan showed the children how to make a kite from sticks and paper. When they ran off to test it in the open field, he glanced toward the house and caught her watching. Instead of looking away, Faith smiled and raised her hand in greeting. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan returned the gesture. That evening, as he prepared to leave, Faith impulsively invited him to Sunday dinner after church. The children would love it, she added quickly, and it's the least I can do to thank you for all your help. Ethan appeared taken aback but nodded. I'd be honored. Sunday arrived clear and warm. After church, where Faith noticed several of the town's unmarried women casting appreciative glances at Ethan, they returned to the homestead for dinner. Faith had spent the previous day preparing, making fresh bread and roasting a chicken, luxuries they rarely indulged in. The meal was a success. Ethan complimented her cooking, making her blush like a schoolgirl. The children chattered excitedly, thrilled to have their favorite visitor at their table. As they ate apple pie for dessert, Thomas looked up at Ethan with serious eyes. Mr. Xavier, do you have any children? Faith nearly choked on her pie. Thomas, that's not a polite question. Ethan waved off her concern. It's all right. He turned to Thomas. No, I don't have any children of my own. Why not? The boy persisted. Thomas, Faith warned. Never found the right woman to marry, I suppose, Ethan answered honestly. Abigail, who had been listening intently, spoke up. You could marry Mama, then you'd have us. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Faith's cheeks burned with embarrassment. Abigail, that's enough. Mr. Xavier is our friend and neighbor. He's been very kind to help us, but that doesn't mean it's all right, Faith, Ethan interrupted gently. He looked at Abigail with kind eyes. Your mama is still missing your papa. And besides, a lady like her deserves a proper courtship, not just a practical arrangement. Abigail seemed to consider this. What's courtship? It's when two people spend time together to see if they suit each other well enough to marry, Ethan explained. Like you and Mama working in the garden together. Thomas asked innocently. Faith stood abruptly. Who would like more pie? The moment passed, but something had shifted. As Ethan prepared to leave that evening, there was a new awkwardness between them. I apologize for the children, Faith said quietly. They don't understand, no need to apologize, Ethan cut in. Children speak their minds. It's one of their better qualities. He hesitated, then added, Faith, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable if you'd prefer I didn't come around so often. No, she said quickly. The children would miss you terribly, she paused, and so would I. Ethan studied her face, then nodded once. Good night, Faith. As summer turned to fall, Ethan continued his visits, though something had changed. There was a new awareness between them, a tension that hadn't existed before. Faith found herself paying more attention to her appearance when she knew he would be coming. Ethan, for his part, began bringing small gifts, a ribbon for Abigail's hair, a new fishing line for Thomas, fresh coffee for Faith. One crisp October day, while the children were at school in town, Ethan arrived with news. The Founders' Day dance is next Saturday, he said, removing his hat as he always did in her presence. I thought perhaps you and the children might like to attend. Faith hesitated. She hadn't been to a social event since her husband's death. I don't know, Ethan. The whole town will be there. It would be good for the children to enjoy themselves. He paused. And for you too. She looked at him standing there, hat in hand, his expression hopeful but reserved. Are you asking to escort us, Mr. Xavier? A faint smile touched his lips. I reckon I am, Mrs. Parker. The night of the dance arrived clear and cool. Faith wore her best dress, a blue calico that she had carefully mended and pressed. She had even splurged on a bit of ribbon for her hair, arranging it in a style she hadn't worn since before her marriage. When Ethan arrived with his wagon, he stopped short at the sight of her, his usual composure momentarily deserting him. You look beautiful, he said simply. The dance was held in the town hall, decorated with autumn leaves and lit by dozens of lanterns. The children ran off to join their friends from school, leaving Faith and Ethan standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the dance floor. Would you care to dance? He asked, offering his hand. Faith hesitated. It's been a long time. I'm not much of a dancer myself, he admitted. We can be clumsy together. She laughed and placed her hand in his. His touch was warm and steady as he led her onto the floor. The music was lively, a reel that had couples whirling and laughing. Ethan proved to be more graceful than he'd claimed, guiding her confidently through the steps. As they danced, Faith became aware of the glances they were attracting. Mrs. Hollister, the postmaster's wife, was watching with particular interest, her head bent close to Mrs. Simmons as they whispered behind their fans. People are watching us, Faith murmured. Ethan's hand tightened slightly on her waist. Let them watch. You deserve a night of enjoyment. Later, as the band struck up a waltz, Ethan drew her closer. They moved together in perfect rhythm, his hand respectfully placed at the small of her back, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Faith could feel the strength in him, the solid reliability that had become her anchor over the past year. Thank you, she said softly, for the dance, for everything, for being there for us, for teaching Thomas to fish and Abigail to read, for fixing the roof and chopping wood and never asking for anything in return. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I didn't do those things expecting gratitude, Faith. I know. That's why you deserve it all the more. As the music ended, they stood for a moment, still in each other's arms, something unspoken passing between them. Then Thomas came running up, breaking the spell. Mama, Mr. Xavier, they're going to have a pie-eating contest. The moment had passed, but something had changed again. As they drove home that night, the children asleep in the back of the wagon, Faith felt a new warmth between them, a sense of possibility that both thrilled and frightened her. At her door, Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a second longer than necessary. I had a fine time tonight, Faith. So did I, she admitted. He looked as if he wanted to say more, but instead he tipped his hat. Good night. Winter came again, bringing with it the second anniversary of her husband's death. Faith woke that morning with a heaviness in her heart, memories washing over her like waves. By now, The pain had dulled to a persistent ache rather than the sharp agony of fresh grief. But it was still there, a reminder of what she had lost. She went through her morning routine mechanically, making breakfast for the children, sending them off to school with packed lunches. When they were gone, she sat at the kitchen table and allowed herself to cry, quietly and without the desperate edge of the previous year. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She wiped her eyes quickly and opened it to find Ethan standing there, a small bunch of winter greenery in his hand. "I remembered what day it was," he said quietly. "Thought you might like company." Faith looked at him, this man who had become so important to her family, who had asked for nothing but had given so much. "Come in," she said, opening the door wider. They sat by the fire, talking softly about her husband's good memories, funny stories. Ethan had known him, had worked cattle with him occasionally, and he shared anecdotes that made Faith laugh through her tears. "He would be grateful for what you've done for us," she said finally, "for being there for his children." Ethan nodded, his eyes on the fire. He was a good man. He deserved to be remembered well. As he prepared to leave, Faith impulsively reached for his hand. "Thank you for coming today." Ethan looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. For a moment, Faith thought he might pull her closer, might bridge the gap that had existed between them for so long. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and let go. "I'll always be here when you need me, Faith, no matter what." The years passed, each season bringing its own challenges and joys. Thomas grew taller, his features beginning to resemble his father's. Abigail blossomed into a thoughtful, intelligent girl who devoured books as quickly as Ethan could bring them from town. Through it all, Ethan remained constant. He was there for every milestone: Thomas's first successful hunting trip, Abigail's prize for the best composition at school. He taught them to ride, to shoot, to respect the land and the animals that sustained them. He never overstepped, never tried to replace their father, but he was always there, a steady presence they could count on. Faith watched her children grow closer to Ethan with each passing year. She saw the way Thomas's eyes would light up when Ethan's horse appeared on the horizon, the way Abigail would save her most interesting observations to share with him. And she noticed changes in herself as well. The way her heart would quicken when she heard his voice, the way she found herself looking forward to his visits, planning what she would wear, what she would cook. Yet neither of them spoke of these feelings. Ethan maintained his respectful distance, never presuming, never pushing. And Faith, still honoring the memory of her husband, never gave him reason to believe she wanted more than friendship. 5 years after her husband's death, a drought hit the valley. Crops withered in the fields, streams dried up, and livestock suffered. Faith watched with growing despair as her corn turned brown, and her vegetable garden shriveled despite her best efforts to irrigate from their dwindling well. Ethan arrived one scorching afternoon with 2 ranch hands and a wagon filled with water barrels. "We'll get your garden through this," he promised, setting up a system to direct the precious water where it was most needed. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the parched landscape, Faith voiced her fears. "If this continues, we might lose everything." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You won't lose everything, not while I'm here." "You can't make it rain, Ethan," she said with a sad smile. "No, but I can make sure you and the children don't go hungry. My ranch has deeper wells. We'll get through this together." Faith looked at him, this man who had been her rock for 5 years. "Why do you care so much about us, Ethan? The truth this time." He met her gaze steadily. "Because you matter to me, all of you, as neighbors, as friends." Ethan hesitated, then said quietly, "You know it's more than that, Faith." Her heart pounded. "Do I?" He looked away out toward the horizon. "It wouldn't be right for me to say more, not yet." Because of Robert. She rarely spoke her husband's name aloud. Partly, Ethan admitted. And partly because I want you to be sure. I don't want to be a solution to a problem. I want to be a choice you make because it's what you truly want. Faith considered his words. And if I'm never ready, Ethan's smile was sad but genuine. Then I'll still be here, helping with the roof and teaching the kids to fish. Some things don't need to change to be worthwhile. The drought eventually broke, and life continued. Thomas turned 12, then 13, growing tall and strong under Ethan's tutelage. Abigail at 15 began to attract the attention of boys in town, much to Faith's concern and Ethan's carefully concealed amusement. One spring day, 7 years after Robert's death, Ethan arrived with news. The railroad's coming through. They're buying up land for the route. Faith frowned. Through our valley, not exactly, but close enough that it changes things. He hesitated. They've offered to buy my ranch. It's a good price, better than I ever expected to get. Faith felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Are you going to sell? I'm considering it. With that money, I could buy twice the land further west. Montana territory is opening up. Good cattle country. Montana, Faith repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. That's very far away. Ethan watched her face carefully. It is, but it's a fresh start. New opportunities. Faith nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She turned away, busying herself with the washing. Faith, Ethan said softly, I'd like you and the children to come with me. She froze, her hands still in the soapy water. What are you saying, Ethan? He took a deep breath. I'm asking you to marry me, to come to Montana as my wife, with Thomas and Abigail as my children in name as well as in my heart. Faith turned to face him, her heart pounding. After all this time, I've been waiting until I felt you were ready. Until I had something substantial to offer you and the children, a real future. And you think I'm ready now? Ethan's eyes held hers. I hope you are, but only you can answer that. Faith looked at this man who had been part of their lives for so long, who had loved her children as his own, who had never asked for anything in return. The children are nearly grown now. Thomas will be a man before we know it. Abigail isn't far behind. I know, Ethan said quietly. But they still need a father. And he paused, then continued with uncharacteristic vulnerability. I need a family. Your family if you'll have me. Faith studied his face, seeing the hope and fear there. I need time to think, Ethan. This isn't just about me. Of course, he agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. That night, Faith sat with her children after dinner. I need to discuss something important with you both. Thomas, now 15 and increasingly like his father in mannerisms, straightened in his chair. Abigail, 17 and perceptive beyond her years, watched her mother's face carefully. Mr. Xavier has asked me to marry him, Faith said directly. He wants us all to move to Montana territory to start a new ranch there. Thomas's eyes widened. Marry Mr. Xavier. Leave here. Abigail was quieter, thoughtful. What did you tell him, Mama? I told him I needed to speak with you both first. This decision affects all of us. But do you want to marry him? Abigail pressed. Faith considered the question. Did she want to marry Ethan Xavier, the man who had been their constant support for 7 years, who had taught her children, protected their home, asked for nothing but given everything? I care for him deeply, she admitted. He's been good to us. But do you love him? Abigail's question was direct, adult. Faith looked at her daughter, surprised by her perception. Yes, I believe I do. Thomas frowned. What about Papa? Would he want you to marry again? Faith reached across the table to take her son's hand. Your father wanted us to be happy and safe, Mr. Xavier has helped ensure both those things for years now. He taught me to ride, Thomas said slowly, and to shoot, and he never made me feel bad when I couldn't do something right away. He brings me books from town, Abigail added, and listens when I talk about them, even when I can tell he doesn't fully understand why I find them so fascinating. Faith smiled. He cares about you both very much. Then I think you should say yes, Mama, Abigail said firmly. Montana sounds exciting, a fresh start for all of us. Thomas was slower to respond, but finally nodded. I guess Mr. Xavier is already kind of like a father anyway. Might as well make it official. The next day, Faith rode to Ethan's ranch for the first time in all the years they had known each other. She found him in the corral working with a young horse. He stopped when he saw her, surprise and hope flashing across his face. Faith, he said, approaching the fence. This is unexpected. She dismounted, tying her horse to the hitching post. I've spoken with the children. Ethan's expression was carefully neutral. And they agree with me that your proposal deserves an answer. Faith took a deep breath. The answer is yes, Ethan. Yes, I will marry you and go to Montana. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if unable to believe what he was hearing. Then he vaulted over the corral fence and crossed to her in 3 long strides. He stopped just short of touching her, his eyes searching her face. Are you certain? I don't want you to feel pressured. Faith smiled, reaching up to touch his weathered cheek. I've had 7 years to consider this moment, Ethan. I'm certain. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he drew her into his arms. Faith went willingly, fitting against him as if they had embraced 1,000 times before. When his lips found hers, gentle and questioning at first, then with growing confidence as she responded, Faith felt a sense of rightness, of coming home. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church, where Faith had mourned her husband 10 years earlier. Thomas stood proudly at Ethan's side, and Abigail arranged wildflowers in Faith's hair. The entire town turned out, Mrs. Hollister dabbing at her eyes and declaring it the most romantic thing she'd ever witnessed. About time, the postmaster muttered to his wife. Man's been in love with her for years. As they exchanged vows, Ethan's voice was steady and sure. I promise to love and cherish you all the days of my life, he said, his eyes never leaving Faith's face, and to continue to be the best father I can be to Thomas and Abigail. Faith's voice trembled slightly as she responded. I promise to love and honor you, Ethan Xavier, and to create a home filled with joy and peace wherever we may go. Their journey to Montana Territory began a month later. The wagon was loaded with their possessions, the proceeds from the sale of both properties secured in a bank draft that would establish their new life. As they passed the boundaries of the land that had been Faith's home for so many years, she felt a momentary pang of sadness. Ethan, sensing her mood, reached over to take her hand. Having second thoughts, Faith looked at him, then back at Thomas and Abigail riding behind them, young and excited for the adventure ahead. No, she said with certainty, just remembering. The past has its place, Ethan said quietly. But so does the future. Faith squeezed his hand. Our future. As they headed west toward the setting sun, Faith reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this point. 10 years of patience, of quiet devotion, of a love that had grown slowly but surely, rooted in respect and mutual caring. Ethan Xavier had waited a decade for her to be ready, had raised her children as if they were his own, asking nothing in return but the opportunity to be part of their lives. Now, as they began their new life together, Faith knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice not just for herself, but for the family they had become. That night, as they made camp under the vast Montana sky, stars spread like diamonds above them, Faith watched Ethan showing Thomas how to build a proper campfire. Abigail sat nearby, writing in her journal, occasionally looking up to ask Ethan a question about the territory ahead. This was her family now, not a replacement for what she had lost, but a new creation, forged through years of shared experiences, mutual respect, and enduring love. The past would always be part of her, but the future, their future together, stretched before them, full of promise. When Ethan joined her by the wagon, his face illuminated by the glow of the fire, Faith leaned into his embrace without hesitation. "Thank you for waiting," she whispered. Ethan's arms tightened around her. "Some things are worth waiting for," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I would have waited forever if I had to." But he hadn't needed to wait forever. 10 years had been enough for grief to heal, for friendship to deepen into love, for a family to form bonds that went beyond blood. As the fire burned low and the children settled into sleep, Faith and Ethan remained awake, talking softly of the ranch they would build, the life they would create together. The widow had finally said yes, and the long wait had made the answer all the sweeter.